Thank you all for joining today. I want to spend the next few minutes talking about pen test and pen test reporting. I really want to dive into several aspects of pen test. I want to talk a little bit about why the popularity has increased in pen testing over the last several years. Talk a little bit about what we want to see in a pen test and how we want to scope it out. Then I want to talk about reporting and what makes a good pen test and what value we can actually derive from a pen test. Before we get started, just a little bit of background on myself. So I've been doing application security for about 20 years now. I started back when application security was just getting started, and OWASP was very much a baby in its life cycle, which has obviously went and it's a huge industry now. But I started pretty early on in the AppSec time, and so I've spent a lot of time in this space, and I've really gotten into the DevSecOps and application security intersection, and I've written a couple of LinkedIn courses around it. And then over the last 5 years, I've also begun to do more work in the cloud. And so I've started a couple of cloud security departments in the last few places I've worked. And then I've also been a CISO and a field CISO at a couple of companies as well, and then a advisor at various companies and enterprises on the topics of security. So kind of doing a little bit of a history on pen testing. Pen testing used to be a lot simpler and not quite as popular maybe 15 or 20 years ago, and that's because we lived in a little bit of a simpler world. So back when I was doing security at the beginning, we really focused on the perimeter. We looked at firewalls and IPS, IDS, and things like that. And that's really kind of, for the most part, that's where security kind of stopped. We really focused there. But over the last several years, we've really underwent a digital transformation in the IT world, and we are building more websites for our customers. We're collecting more data. We're sharing more data. And so we're taking these old processes that we've had internally and we're digitizing them. There are whole companies that are founded around digital transformation. There are departments inside of enterprises that deal with digital transformation. And so we've really just increased the amount of data that we collect and that we have and that we make available on the internet. And then to kind of put it on top of all that, cloud has really increased exponentially. We have entire companies that are taking their data centers and moving out of data centers and putting it all in the cloud now, and that is a huge factor from a security perspective. Data centers are not as popular as they were, and everybody wants to move to the cloud to take advantage of the many features and security features and the failover features that cloud offers you. So what does that mean from a security perspective? Why is the digital transformation important from security? Well, as we do the digital transformation and we make more data available, it increases the attack surface. So it's not as simple as firewalls and intrusion detection and intrusion prevention systems anymore. Now we have web servers and websites and all sorts of web services, things that we're providing that are out there. So we've really increased our attack surface. And so as you increase your attack surface, then security needs have increased. No longer do we have these 2 or 3 people security teams in most places who just monitor IDS, IPS. We have cloud security, we have network security and application security folks. Our security needs have really increased, and we have multiple exposure points now, right? It's not just one entry point into our network. It's dozens or hundreds of different port openings and cloud services that we've exposed, right? So security needs have really increased. And thus, as our exposure and our attack surface has increased, the pen testing demand has increased as well. So we have to make sure that we know what all we are sharing. out on the internet. We have to have somebody validate that, and people that we do business with want to validate that, right? So as all of this as security needs have increased, the pen testing demand has just really taken off as well. So, just to kind of start off with a basic definition, what is a pen test? Because one of the things that I found in security is that not everybody has the same definition of security terms. A pen test to one person may be a vulnerability scan to another, or a vulnerability scan to one person is a static scan to another people. Just because we use a lot of terminology, and if we don't define it well, then we end up causing confusion, right? So what is a pen test? What is a penetration test? The simplest way that I look at it is that it's a black box test of the environment, right? So it's generally, with a static test of code, we can look at the code and we can analyze how it works, right? And come at it that way. But with a black box test, that's not the case. We're coming at it without being able to see the internals, right? That we're given very little information to understand how it works. And really with a pen test, scope is the most important part, because the value of a pen test, you have to know what was tested and what was not tested, right? So that's one of the first things that I always look at is when I see a pen test report is, okay, you tested the app, but you didn't test the web services. Why? Or so you can really define the scope of a pen test, and that's really important. And then the pen test can also be different types. You may just want to look at an application. So you would provide your pen tester with a URL and say, here, go, see what you can find. Or maybe you want it to be an authenticated and an unauthenticated pen test. So you would hand them credentials so that they can look at both. Or maybe it's a network test. You just want to scan your network looking for holes, looking for ports that are open, or servers that are listening, or file shares that are open to the world. You want it to be just a network-based one, and you don't care as much about the application. Or maybe it's both. Maybe you want all of the above. You want a phishing simulated test. You want a network, an application, and you just tell the pen testing team, hey, here's my company name. See what you can find. See if you can get into our environment. Go, right? And so the scope is really important, and it's what you have to look at when you're doing a pen test. So why are pen tests important, and what do we use them for? So the first thing is that we want to highlight the risk areas, right? So we don't always know what is out there. So we want to use a pen test to independently look at and help highlight our risk areas. So what do I mean by that is maybe the pen test may look at it and they may use it to say, hey, you know what, your applications over here, they host PHI and they're going to be the highest risk, so we're going to focus the most on there. The pen test may look at it. You may not know where to focus. So if you're building a security program from scratch, one of the hardest things to do is to know, what do I look at? What should I do? I don't know. I have 20 different things I could look at. A pen test will help you highlight those risk areas, right? Because they'll look at your entire environment. They'll look at your network. They'll look at your applications, and they'll say, and you'll look at the results and be like, oh, look, I'm lacking application control here. This is my highest priority, and they'll help you really highlight where you should focus and what maybe you're missing. They'll also help you verify your security processes. So this is one of the most valuable pieces I find with a pen test. We all, I've built application security programs and cloud security programs. And the fact is, you just miss stuff sometimes, right? You'll miss an application. You think you have your application, you think I have 15 apps, and then you find out you have 5 more you don't know about. Or maybe there's a part of your application that you're not doing security testing on that you thought that you were, right? So you can use the pen test to independently validate that your processes, your security testing processes, are working like you expect them to work. Analyze vendors. So One of the hottest areas of security these days is governance, risk, and compliance, GRC, right? Third-party reviews, fourth-party reviews. If you look at a lot of the breaches that have happened, it's not necessarily because an enterprise's security has failed, but one of their third-party or fourth-party supplier security has failed and allowed them to get into their environment that way, right? So one of the big things that we can do, and I spend a lot of my time doing this, is talking with vendors. I come at it from both sides, right? So I get questioned when we're selling a product, and then and when we are getting ready to buy a product, I question them as well. And so pen tests are a way to validate your vendors and say, all right, you're telling me that you do application security testing, but you need to show me that, right? And an independent third-party pen test is how they can do that. So a good pen test report is a validation tool that you can use when you're doing your analysis. And then finally, mergers and acquisitions review. So whenever I work for a company and we're getting to do we're going to merge with another company, or we're going to acquire a company, I always require an independent pen test of their systems, right? It helps you know the last thing that you want to do is purchase a company and then have to spend $5 million to get them up to speed from a security perspective, unless you know that going in, right? So a pen test is a really good way to be able to validate that and know what you're in for when you buy a company. And so this is one of the things that I always require whenever we're getting ready to do an acquisition, is get an independent pen test report. It can really be valuable to help you know what controls may be lacking and where you should focus after the M&A is complete. So what's in a pen test report? So the first thing that should be in any pen test report is an executive summary, and there's a few reasons for this. One is sometimes when you send this to the leadership, they just want to know, give me the bottom line, right? What do I need to care about? They're not going to want to look through all the technical details of how a particular exploit was found or anything like that, right? That's all in the next 20, 30, 40 pages of the report. What they want to know is just give me the bottom line. Do we have anything critical that I need to worry about? Do we have anything high that I need to worry about? Bottom line it for me, right? And that's one of the reasons you need an executive summary. The second reason that you need it is because sometimes when you need to share your pen test report, you don't want to send a company your entire pen test report. Like if somebody's doing a due diligence on you because they're going to buy your product, most of the times companies don't say, here's my full pen test report that somebody did, right? An executive summary gives you something that you could give a third party to say, here, I have this done. It was by an independent party, and here it is, without providing all the details, right? So that's another reason an executive summary is important. So what's important inside? What should you look for inside a good executive summary? One is that it's concise. So if you have an executive summary that's 5 pages, not going to work, right? It should be a 1-pager, and it should be clearly written. It should be concise and to the point to say, here's what we did, here's the quick scope of what we did, here's how many issues that we found, and then any recommendations that you may have, and be done, right? So when you talk about what was found, just say, here's how many critical, here's how many high, here's how many medium, here's how many low. Don't go into, all of the nuts and bolts of, well, we found 5 cross-site scripting and 2 SQL injection and 3 session manipulation issues. Don't go into that level of detail, because the executive that's going to be reading this won't understand that, right? And then the security person will be left trying to explain to a C-level or a VP what a cross-site scripting is, and then why it may or may not be important to your app, right? So just leave it at very high level of how many criticals, highs, mediums, lows that were found. mention what was tested and mention what wasn't tested. I didn't say that here, but conversely, talk about if there's something that was left out of the scope, that can be mentioned too. But talk about what was tested. You know, talk about we tested X application, and we tested it both authenticated and non-authenticated. We did not test the network as a part of this, so on and so forth. Really lay out what the scope was, so that everybody knows and is on the same page with what was tested, what wasn't tested, and why certain items were left out of the scope. And then finally, talk about how did you do it, right? So just a quick summary, you don't have to lay it out, but how did you come about the pen test report? You know, how did you come about the pen test? Did you do it with some knowledge, without some knowledge? Did you do it through phishing to start? Just kind of give a quick summary of what the methodology was that you used, right? You don't have to make it just a paragraph and summarize it down, but just kind of state, you know, how did you do it? How did you find these issues? What was used? The second thing that I like to spend a little bit of time on in a pen test is the methodology. There are a lot of different frameworks that you can use when you do a pen test. So just talk a little bit about what methodology was used, right? So what types of tests did you do? Did you do the network test, an application test, a port scan? You know, maybe as a part of this, you did an Internet of Things test. Just list out kind of the methodology that you use. Did you, you know, did you use anything, an OWASP type of methodology? Did you use NIST? You know, what kind of a framework did you use? There are several pen testing frameworks that are out there, right? So did you use any of those? Just describe how you came at it, you know? A lot of times, you know, when I've been a part of just a lot of black box testing where they say, here's our, you know, here's our company name, go find us, right? And then they go through social networking and they find some of the key players in the organization, and then they send phishing credentials to them to get in, and just kind of lay that all out so that the people reading the report, the technical people, can understand, you know, where you started from in order to get your information. You know, did you start with some information that was given, or did you start with a blank slate? It just kind of helps understand that. And then talk about the tools that were used. You know, typically pen testers have a tool set that they use, and a standard tool set. So just talk a little bit about what you used in the process of it, so that the people reading the report can reproduce it and understand what you did, and maybe use that to improve their internal processes, right? The next, you know, I've mentioned it a little bit, but talk about the scope a little bit more. Detail, we did it a little bit on the executive summary, but do it even more in a separate section, right? Talk about the scope. Talk about what was tested. So, you know, the example that I mentioned earlier was, you know, the application, this application at this URL was tested. It was tested in a non-production environment, but we didn't test the APIs because of, you know, list your reason. And then also talk about who was tested. So a lot of times when you're doing a pen test, you want to test the different roles. You don't just want to test it from the outside, but a common tactic is to get in as a normal user and then try and elevate your privileges, right? It's privilege escalation attack. And so talk about how you did that. You know, mention we logged in as user A. This user was a normal user in the application, and then through this method, you know, we tried to elevate our privileges. Or, you know, we also tested this as an administrative user. Just talk about the different roles that you used when you were testing the application. And where was it tested? This is important to note because sometimes production is obviously different than tests or UAT. So just make a note about the URL where this was tested. Was a separate environment set up specifically for this pen test that exactly mirrored production? Did you just test in the QA environment? Where exactly did you do this testing? And finally, results. So at the, afterwards, after we've gotten all the other things out of the way, let's talk through the results quite a bit. So talk about the severity of what you found. And this is a pet peeve of mine in pen tests. When we're writing a pen test report, we like to say, oh, this is cross-site scripting, this is severe. This is SQL injection, this is severe. And that's true, but I think it's more helpful when we give a little bit of context around it. Meaning, if it's a SQL injection error, that's obviously bad. But if you have, in order for that SQL injection to be exploited, if the application is whitelisted so that only certain people can get to it, and you have to log into the application using SSO, and you have to be an administrator to get to the page where SQL injection is exploited, is it truly a critical, right? So when you're looking at the severity of what is found, I would just say add a little bit of context to make sure, just don't immediately say it's critical because it's a SQL injection, right? And so list the severity of what you find, talk about that. Mention detailed repeatability steps, right? So make this a learning exercise for the people that are reading the report. So, I want to use these reports. Me as a security leader want to use these reports to make sure and improve our processes. If I come out of a pen test report and I don't have any lessons learned to do things better, it's probably not very valuable, right? Because I'm going to repeat the same thing next year. So detail out the repeatability steps so that we can look through and make sure that we not only agree with it, but that we can repeat it and make sure that our processes are updated. And then mention a suggested remediation for. So don't just say, here's the problem, here's what we did, but mention a suggested remediation. How can the person fix this, right? Is it a matter of using of whitelisting characters? Is it a matter of doing better session handling? Like, talk about how you can actually go about and fix it. It's very valuable when you add that context as well. And then finally, use the data. So coming out of here, the pen test report is very valuable to go along with the pen testing exercise itself, but you have to use the data that comes out of it, right? And so one of the ways to do that is it empowers leaders to make risk decisions. So we talked about earlier several ways that pen test could be used. A good pen test report will allow executives to say, here's where we need to focus. So this year, because our pen test showed that we have some application issues, one of our priorities for the year is going to be getting a better application security program in place, right? Or we can see that we were way too easily phished. So we need to have better user awareness program in place. Use it to help make risk decisions. Another example would be with M&As, right? So if you're going in and you're doing an M&A and you're like, yes, we're going to acquire this company, let's do a pen test. The pen test comes back showing that they've got some work to do. Use that as a way to know what you're getting into. Know, okay, we're going to buy this company, but we're going to have to do about $3 million worth of work to get it up to our standards, right? Those are the kind of risk decisions that you can use that you can make from a pen test report. Test the security. So use this to better your security processes, right? So you can use it to test the processes that you have in place and make them better. So none of us are perfect, and when we're in there doing the work day in and day out, sometimes you don't take a step back to analyze your own process to see if there are ways to make it better. Use this pen test report as a means to do that and find any gaps in your process. And then finally, use it to highlight any focus areas. Just from an organizational point of view, is there anything you're missing? Is there a piece of your security program that you don't have? You can use the pen test report to really highlight that and maybe bring that to executives as something that's missing. And that's what I have from a content perspective. So thanks everybody for listening, and now I'll take some questions.